All right, folks, part two of our discussion about the Atlanta mayoral's race. You got 12 candidates running there. You have a white female city council member who is leading the pack. And if she, first of all, more than likely there'll be a runoff with 12 people running, but she, of course, leading in the polls. If she wins, this will be the first non-African American to be mayor of Atlanta since Maynard Jackson was elected in 1973. As a result of his election, we have seen how African American mayors have changed Atlanta, have changed the country when it comes to economics, utilizing that position to force the city's white business establishment to do far more when it comes to minorities and definitely African Americans when it comes to contracts. When you look at the world-class airport, when you look at the affirmative action program, when you look at all across the city of Atlanta, you see how significant this is, and it was a major battle Maynard Jackson led.
This was a major manager of a major white corporation who got very upset with me about the policy on affirmative action and said, I don't see this to be necessary. We're going to do what's right. You know, you can trust us and so forth. And I said, I have every confidence, but, you know, I want to trust you, but I also want you to sign on a dotted line.
Well, of course, the great-grandson of slaves who served 3 terms as Atlanta's mayor sparked a political revolution not only in the South but across the nation as it became clear that giving economic power to people of color was not only possible but could be made a priority, and the white establishment would have to deal with it.
The policies that were put in place in Atlanta were duplicated in cities across the country and even by our federal government.
This was a training ground to help not only Atlantans, but to help America cope with race.
Now, Young says the same whites who worried about Jackson's aggressive push for economic power for people of color were concerned that with Young's election, outside investment would dry up. Instead, it actually got better.
He said, as the mayor of the city of Atlanta, I can simply pick up trash and do the basics and provide police services, or we can really soar together. And fortunately, we had a business community in Atlanta that was fortunate enough to overcome its old grievances and a leader that held folks accountable, and they did soar together.
All right, joining us right now is one of those folks who have walked in the footsteps of Maynard Jackson, Andrew Young, is Bill Campbell, former mayor of Atlanta. Mayor Campbell, again, one of the reasons I'm focusing on this because I'm really trying to get folks to understand how critical black leadership has been in changing these cities. Individuals who are coming in who understand what it means to not just take power, but make it perfectly clear how to wield power. When you look at this election, do you believe that this generation of folks in Atlanta really understand what that means?
Well, good morning, Roland. First, it is imperative that African Americans particularly understand the power of the vote. Maynard Jackson used to always say to me, the challenge is not just to get free, the challenge is to stay free. And so it still is today. There was a golden age of African American leadership across the country in cities, as you well remember, Roland, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, where you were from, with Harold Washington, Dallas, Houston, Denver, Seattle, all these cities, of course, New Orleans, Detroit, all these cities had African-American mayors at about the same time. And it was a transformative nature of what Maynard Jackson put into place that helped stimulate African-American economic prosperity. When Maynard took office in '73 in a city that was 70% African-American, only 1% of the contracts were going to African-Americans. He changed the face of that. Now think about over $10 billion having been spent just in the development of Atlanta's airport, now Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, appropriately named, and think about 35 to 40% of that going to African-American and female-owned businesses. It has changed the face of the economic prosperity for African-Americans across this country.
And when we look at, again, what has changed across the country, it's very interesting because you now see in Detroit, white mayor, You see the same thing in Memphis. We've seen how things have
in
changed
New Orleans.
In New Orleans as well. And so a lot of these places where folks have talked about Chocolate City, we have now seen this change. Do you believe that this shows progress? And you will say like in Philadelphia as well. But one of the issues, Mayor Campbell, I talked to a major businesswoman in Philadelphia who says that the white mayor of Philadelphia does not like the contracts that so many minorities are getting, but that person has no understanding that black people were frozen out of the corporate sector. So black business has been able to grow and thrive because of governmental contracts.
When Maynard Jackson was elected, not only did he change the entire focus of what's necessary in terms of economic diversity, he made it a moral imperative that also stimulated the corporate community to be more inclusive because they wanted to be a part of city contracting as well. Roland, we don't always have the most to gain from elections, but we certainly have the most to lose. We can see that in what's happened now in this insanity in the White House. Think about all of the federal judges as the example that will be appointed by this president, not my president, but by this president, and think about what change that will cause in so many important areas. I can understand that there are many African Americans who may say, well, this doesn't really matter to me, but it matters to your children and your grandchildren. Maynard Jackson changed the face of politics in this country, and it's imperative that we understand how critical it is. Today, as an example, there's an African American, Charles Francis, running for mayor in Raleigh, North Carolina, my hometown. We've got to make certain that we vote. If only a few thousand African American votes turned out in Philadelphia, in Detroit, and in Milwaukee, we would have an entirely different country today.
And again, when you had 14% turnout in the last election, that is simply an abomination.
Disgraceful. It's disgraceful because, as I say, Roland, we have the most to lose, and we simply cannot sit at home and watch reality television while reality is striking us in the face with what's happening in Washington. We've got to get out. We've got to vote. It doesn't cost you anything. People will provide you rides to the polls. There is simply no reason for African Americans not to vote, especially when we see countries like South Africa with the 96% voting record. And we have sometimes, as you say, 10, 12% African American percentage of those going to the polls. It makes no sense to me, and I can only understand that we must re-educate a new generation to understand the moral imperative of going to the polls because we have so much to lose, Roland.
I'll say this here. You said voting doesn't cost you. Not voting will cost you. Mayor Bill Campbell, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so very much.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh, my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no. That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.